There have been a lot of parallels drawn between the ideology of heaven as well as this ultimate authority that is extremely totalitarian. As a matter of fact, Christopher Hitchens himself advocated that the Christian heaven is actually just a celestial North Korea, because in the end, the Christian God just is this insecure entity that punishes people that disagree with the idea that we ought to worship him on a regular basis. And, that's probably not too far from true. But the ultimate question is, do we really need to avoid that in order to achieve freedom? Which goes back to Robert Greene Interschool's quote, which is, "There can be but little liberty on earth while men worship a tyrant in heaven." The advocacy that these men put forward is that we are not able to achieve a universal sense of liberty as long as there's some sort of ideology on earth that links into an afterlife that has a totalitarian approach to whatever utopia they're dreaming of. And in some retrospects this is true, and in this video I will analyze the main aspects of both sides. And by both sides I mean mainly the advocacy and whatever disadvantages might be to the argument. I mean, let's look at a random online definition of liberty, and that is the state of being free within society from oppressive restrictions imposed by authority on one's way of life. And that's pretty much libertarianism in a more elaborate version. And even as socially liberal as you can get, pro-abortion and, gay marriage and all these things that, ought to be legal, at the end of the day, we cannot fully achieve this sense of liberty for the simple fact that every single individual has different demands. And I mean, it's cool, we can just legalize weed on top, but there's always going to be something that people want to do that will overall, just negatively affect the people, because some people just have, psychological disorders, etc., and they think burning down schools would be fun to watch, so they should have the liberty to do so. This is why we need, in some respects, a social contract that, establishes what freedoms we ought and what not to get. And this is mainly where the question of whether or not we need religion for it to be able to achieve this sense of liberty. And I mean, if we go back to the state of nature where there's no social contract and there's an idea that there's perfect anarchy and, people can just do whatever and everybody's just in charge of themselves, that obviously cannot be achieved in the pragmatic world, right? There's too many things that go wrong. Punishments are not proportionate. That's why we need a higher authority, i.e. a government, that preserves the social order. The people die, but the government is eternal in some retrospects. The government, like the entity of a government that will establish and preserve a social order, is, a quite beneficial idea, because without it we would not be productive whatsoever. With that being said, we cannot look at the definition of liberty as everybody can just do whatever they want. And then the question might be, what is the best way to approach liberty in order for us to achieve a utopian sense of liberty with satisfying the sense of freedom? And I personally believe, like, from a psychological perspective, the best kind of freedom we can get is the freedom of thought, right? Having the freedom to question everything and everyone is the true sense of freedom that I'm advocating for. But it's not only the freedom of questioning things, because obviously within our minds we do have the ability naturally to question things without people knowing whether or not we question them. The true core part of the argument is being able to speak up, having the freedom to express these skeptical ideas, freedom of speech. So ultimately, the freedom of thought and speech are the core of the sense of liberty. And the reason why people just say, well, we have this right and the other right, look, as George Carlin clearly proposed, and a lot of people beforehand, rights are just this cute idea that give us a false sense of freedom. We need something that preserves skepticism, because there's nothing better in this world than questioning things, and science is the hard proof of this. The reason why science is so productive is because it questions everything. Therefore, the ultimate sense of freedom that we can achieve as humans is by having the ability to speak freely about whatever we're thinking about, and that being open to discussion and debate without us, threatening the existence of an imaginary friend. And that is something a government ought to preserve in order to not only preserve social order from a socially liberal perspective, but also achieve this full sense of liberty and freedom. And now, as the original question posed, do we have to get rid of religion in order to achieve this kind of utopian sense of liberty, this kind of utopian society in which we are allowed to question and speak up against everything? Well, a lot of pragmatic people might say, well, look at America, right? We still have a lot of religions around, and people are still allowed to question things. And then the key to the solvency of this issue will be just limit the power of the people that are opposed this kind of sense of liberty. So, i.e., Christian fundamentalists and Muslims and, extreme Muslims for that matter, I apologize. And, just any kind of fundamentalist slash radical that is against this kind of freedom ought to be, kept in check, and that is the way we could achieve it. However, that might work on a macro scale, right? You might be able to be brought in a society which you're able to think, although your family does not. But if you look at it the other way, you can't take away the power of a parent in all respects. I mean, you obviously can, but here's why it would be a completely bad move from a societal point of view. So let me just give you the scenario. So in this arguments fiat world, you can just say, well, as long as we don't give those people power, then we will be able to achieve the social order while preserving the freedom of speech. But let's just say this radical person has a kid, and the kid goes to school and they're being indoctrinated in that specific dogmatic ideology. Meanwhile, going to school in which they're openly able to talk about everything, but while they go home, they're not. The children are not able. Well, first of all, from a philosophical point of view, we're now fully achieving the value of freedom of speech because it is not universal, because the kid is not able to openly speak up against anything. And moreover, we have to consider the power that the parent has over that child. The parent can just be like, you're not allowed to question this in my house. If you don't like it, you can just walk away. And in an ideal society, that kid might go with another parent, or they might go to their friend's house, or some sort of like humanitarian programs might take care of him or her. But, realistically, that cannot happen. Just imagine if all environments would be open to question, but so many families would be against this specific, skeptical approach to things. That would mean that we would have a lot of kids on the streets or in different houses because their parents wouldn't accept them, and violence is never the answer. And with that being said, we would have this social chaos that we would create for this because we don't achieve the full value of freedom of speech. There's still places that are not allowed, and therefore it ultimately harms the society. We have to end up dealing with these children that are smart enough to be able to question things, but their parents are not, so they have to suffer some sort of retaliation that prevents them from going home and having a unified family. So at the end of the day, unfortunately, yes, we do have to get rid of all dogmatic beliefs in order to achieve this kind of freedom of speech, because a politically temperate environment doesn't allow for an individual to question every ideology everywhere. And in order to achieve this full value of liberty, we have to be able to practice our freedom everywhere. Otherwise, it's not a freedom, it's just a privilege. And ultimately, a lot of people can argue through critiques that rights don't exist, and there's just this idea that's being reinforced from our government in order to give us this false sense of freedom. And for most of the part, that's true. I mean, even if you look at America, there's no such thing as absolute democracy. No country is an absolute democracy. I mean, the Electoral College elects a president, etc. So, I mean, even in the American system, there's no such thing as absolute democracy, because then we would have tyranny of the majority. So, ultimately, we do have limitations on our democratic, habits and, what we can and cannot do in a democratic state. So the ultimate question is just, would a government be able to preserve this kind of social, social privilege of being able to speak everywhere. I mean, you can just be like, well, the United Nations can just make it a bill, and then we'll somehow find a way to make it reinforced, and then yada yada yada. As we know, that doesn't work. Look at Iran; they're having a nuclear program. UN is taxing them. US is taxing them. They don't care. They're still gonna make it happen. So, money and just taxation and a way to prevent it is not fully achievable. It doesn't solve for the problem. And I guess the two questions that I'm leaving you with is, first of all, do you agree with my premise that we have to get rid of all dogmatic ideologies in order to fully achieve this kind of freedom in which we're able to question everything everywhere? And secondly, what's the solvency of this idea? Like, how would we as humans be able to implement this kind of utopian privilege that we can question everything everywhere? How would it be reinforced? I mean, as of now, my current answer, and obviously it's not a perfect answer, and it's clearly open for debate, is atheism is growing in numbers, and that's a given. And which means there's going to be a higher increase in tolerance, which means there's going to be more room for us to debate and be able to question things. However, that's not going to ultimately help. So, I mean, there's a time frame argument. So over time, after 200 years, if we still exist, that everybody will be able to question, because everybody will be an atheist, so everybody is just going to pursue knowledge and education rather than divine beings and irrational beliefs. But we don't have that much time in our lifetime. We don't live that long. So I mean, is there any way for us as a society, as global thinkers, as global citizens, is there a way for us to enforce this right on a global scale? If so, how? If not, why not? And if you're not sure, just throw in a bunch of arguments and we'll just see where it goes. Thank you so much.